Satchel out. Satchel out.
Huh.
Satchel out. Satchel out.
Nggak
Satchel out.
bisa ke gen loh.
Satchel out.
What the fuck? Kira FPS. I think I switched to Neon, bro.
The nerf to Raze's movement speed caused many Raze mains to lose hope with regards to double satchels, with some of the best Raze mains in the world having difficulty with jumps that were commonplace before. At one point, Ray4C even claimed that the ascent jump from A main to generator was now impossible. So how is it that I, a washed up ascendant player, was able to hit this jump on my second try? Okay, it's still possible, it's just a bit harder. Is it because I'm better than Ray4C at Satchels? No, it's because I'm insane. Not at Valorant, clinically insane. I've spent an unhealthy amount of time thinking about the mechanics behind Raze's Satchels. Why does jumping from a height make you faster? Why does it stop making you faster after a certain height has been reached? Should you look forwards or downwards when throwing your second satchel? When should you be crouching or standing? This video doesn't contain information on how to airstrafe or b-hop, so I'll leave a link in the description to the video that I watched when I was first learning Raze. It should help you get your feet off the ground. Haha, you see. Okay, here's a list of the topics that I'll cover throughout the video, and I'll leave timestamps in the description so you can skip around, but I genuinely believe that you'll benefit from watching the video in its entirety. The first thing to talk about is the kind of unintuitive way that satchels actually work. You see, back when I was but a curious young boy, I decided to do an experiment where I went into a custom game and threw a satchel against the wall. I stood at different distances from the satchel and then recorded how far I ended up from the wall. I took the difference between those two distances to get the distance that I moved from my starting position. I later refined this experiment and performed it a further 3 times to make sure that I wasn't schizophrenic. What I discovered was that the further you are from the satchel, the more force you receive, up until the edge of the blast radius of 6 meters. Conversely, being closer to the satchel gives you less force. This means that you should always try to hit as close to the edge of the blast radius as possible for maximum propulsion. To summarize, the blast radius is 6 meters, zoop good, more far away equals more zoop, more than 6 meters far away equals no zoop. Now, the additional force is already a great reason to go for the outer edge of the blast radius, but even if the satchel gave the same amount of force from anywhere in the blast radius, it's still better to be on the outside edge. Let me explain with an example. Suppose Raze is falling, and her path to the ground looks like this. Now imagine there's a satchel here, and you want to detonate it when Raze is at a 45-degree angle to the ground. But you'd need to be a robot to hit it at exactly that point. So let's say that you can afford to detonate the satchel within this angle. If we look at the point where Raze's falling path overlaps with the green area, we can see how long we have in the flight path to detonate the satchel. If we move the satchel back slightly, you can see that the amount of time that Raze's path overlaps the green area has increased. This makes it significantly easier to detonate the satchel within the same angle and thus allows for greater control over your satchels. This of course varies from satchel to satchel. In this jump, the goal is to get from the box in B main to the other side of switch, falling off onto site. I made this scale accurate diagram to represent the first half of the jump. Here's the box in B main, the wall you have to satchel around, and the satchel. I also measured Raze's jump height and distance and made a projected jump path that follows her center of mass. As you can see, Raze doesn't reach the edge of the blast radius at any point, so let's see what happens when we move the satchel back towards the box. If I move back the first satchel, then I could detonate it when Raze was in the same position, but the angle at which the satchel propelled her would be more horizontal, meaning that Raze would be too close to the ground by the time I threw the second satchel and making the jump harder. Why is it harder, you ask? Well, firstly, you now have to reach the same height from a lower starting point with one satchel. Secondly, in a real world example, being too close to the satchel means that it will give less power. The satchel has to be between Raze and the floor for it to propel her upwards, so being too close to the floor means too close to the satchel means a dud.
Satchel out.
Bruh. The reason why Raze can't reach the outer edge of the blast radius at the desired angle is because the starting platform is lower to the ground, such that even when Raze jumps straight up, she is still within the blast radius. This means that no matter where you put the satchel, Raze can only reach the outer edge when she is at the wrong angle. Even when jumping from above the edge of the blast radius, it should be taken into consideration that moving a satchel back changes the angle at which you require the satchel to detonate. If all of that made no sense, all you need to know is that aiming for the outer edge of the blast radius is extra good. It's good once because you get more power, and it's good twice because it's more consistent, so you'll have more control. So what do I mean by a technical jump? It's a jump where you start from an elevated platform and have to jump to another elevated platform with an obstacle in between. These are usually double satchels, and they require an airstrafe to get around the obstacle. Most technical double satchels can be broadly categorized into two types: satchel-satchel strafe jumps and satchel-strafe satchel jumps. I'm good at naming things. Generated to A main is a satchel-satchel strafe jump, where you throw and detonate both satchels before strafing. A main to generator is a satchel-strafe satchel jump, where you airstrafe after detonating the first satchel but before throwing the second one. If you throw the second satchel before strafing, then you'll just have to make a longer distance with the same amount of juice. There's a pretty simple way to determine which type of jump you should use. If you can afford to save your second satchel until after the strafe, you should. It means you can maximize the distance you get from the second satchel. The obvious exception to this rule is if you don't want to maximize the distance of your jump, although I can't really think of a time when you would want that. If you look again at the clip of Ray4C trying to do this jump, you can see that he's throwing his second satchel before completing his airstrafe. And we'll talk in a minute about why this was harder for him specifically, but first we have to talk about... There's a lot of contradictory information on YouTube about where you should look when throwing your second satchel.
With double satcheling, if you want to go far and fast, the second satchel should always be like aimed below you at your feet.
Satchel out. Satchel out.
You don't do this. I see a lot of people look down while they throw their second satchel. What you want to do is keep your crosshair placement right where I've got it now. So in between looking down and headshot height, you want it right in the middle.
A lot of players, coaches and guides advise looking almost straight down, and you can see this exhibited in experienced, high-level Raze players like Jing and Zekin. But if you look at Grey FPS, a well-known movement Raze, you can see that he looks more diagonally to the ground. If you look at other well-known movement specialists like SupRaze, Satchel Demon and Ray4C, you can see that they tend to look even more horizontal. So let's take a look at some of the advantages of each style of double satchel. But before that, I want to talk about what the difference even is between these two types of double satchel. You might have thought, but if the satchel is in the same position relative to Raze when it explodes, won't it have the same effect on her movement whether she's looking forwards or downwards? And you'd be correct. So what is the difference? Well, the main difference is in the amount of time you have to wait after throwing the satchel before it's behind you. If you throw it looking directly at the floor, it'll be behind you almost immediately after you throw it. If you throw it whilst looking forwards, it'll take a bit longer before it's behind you. Now, with this in mind, let's go back to comparing the utility of these two styles. We'll start with the forward-facing double satchel. First of all, when I say forward-facing, I really mean diagonal, something like what Grey FPS was showing, or what you can see from the other movement Razes. Looking at head height will very rarely end up with a good result. The first benefit of using a forward-facing double satchel is that you can actually see where you're going. You wouldn't think that the 45 or so degrees between looking downwards and forwards would make a big difference to visibility, but what matters is the delayed detonation of the forward-facing satchel. When throwing a downwards-facing second satchel, it has to be detonated almost immediately after throwing. The increased delay on the forwards-facing satchel means that there's time to look ahead before you detonate the satchel. Compared to a downwards-facing double satchel, it can be easier to perform technical jumps when you can see the obstacle in front of you. The next advantage of looking forwards is maneuverability. The only ways to change direction mid-air as Raze are to airstrafe or to satchel. Airstrafing is obviously slower than satcheling because the faster you airstrafe, the more likely you are to spin out. Comparatively, satcheling is an instant propulsion. The problem with a downwards facing satchel is that you're throwing the satchel beneath you and waiting for it to be behind you to pop it. No matter which direction you're moving, the downwards facing satchel will only increase your velocity in that direction. And if you said, but Soil, what if I'm moving downwards? Won't the downwards facing satchel change my direction? Fuck you, I hope you step on a Lego. As I was saying, the downwards facing double satchel will only increase your velocity in that direction. This means that the only way to change your direction with a satchel is to look up and throw the satchel in front or to the side of your character. Now, you might say that you also have to look to the side when using a forward facing satchel, and you would be right. Popping a satchel right in front of your face whilst moving forwards will just kill all your momentum, and delaying the satchel results in it ending up behind you, so it will just increase your speed again. You still have to look to the side when posed for a forwards facing satchel, but the distance is less, Suppose you want to throw a satchel 90 degrees left of your direction of movement. From looking straight down, you would have to look 90 degrees up and then 90 degrees left, or the other way around. You can even do them at the same time by moving your mouse diagonally, but from looking straight ahead, you only have to look 90 degrees left. Now you might just say, well then I'll just move my mouse faster, but that would still be suboptimal. You could just resolve yourself to flick faster, but that will always be slower than flicking at that same speed from straight ahead, because the distance is lower. Besides, flicking over a longer distance will be less accurate, so you'll be more likely to make mistakes when trying to change directions with a downwards facing double satchel. One of the biggest differences between forwards facing satchels and downwards facing satchels is in how long you have to wait before detonating the satchel. When facing downwards, the satchel will take less time to reach Raze's back than it will if it's thrown while facing forwards. The first reason this is important is consistency. If I asked you to close your eyes and count 1 second, do you think you could get close? Maybe you could get within 0.1 seconds pretty comfortably. What if I asked you to close your eyes and count 1 minute? Maybe you would get within 1 second consistently, but asking you to consistently get within 0.1 seconds of an entire minute would be a bit much, right? The error margin increases the longer you wait. If I asked for an hour, it would be ridiculous to expect you to get within 0.1 seconds even once, never mind consistently. Once you throw a satchel whilst moving forwards, it will disappear from your view pretty much immediately, hence why I had you closing your eyes for the previous example. The difference between a forwards versus downwards facing satchel is less like 1 second versus 1 hour and more like 0.2 versus 0.5 seconds, but the point still stands. It's easier to consistently time the satchel to be behind you when facing downwards than it is when facing forwards. Of course, this changes depending on the speed you're going and is still largely reliant on practice. If you practice using forwards facing satchels instead, it's likely that you'll still be able to consistently time it well, which is why you rarely see the Raze movement specialist looking downwards. However, there's one more benefit to using a downwards facing satchel compared to a forwards facing satchel. When close to the ground, throwing a satchel in front of you can sometimes mean that you'll hit the ground before the satchel has a chance to get behind you. This will lose you some or all of your speed if you don't time a B-hop perfectly. Even if you do B-hop perfectly, you still have to detonate the satchel at the right time. In a split second, doing all this is really difficult. Aside from being a machine, there are 3 ways to solve this problem. The first one is to gain more height on your first satchel. This way you'll be further from the ground and won't have to worry about hitting it. But you'll have to sacrifice speed on the first satchel to get the height, and so you'll have less speed on the second satchel as well. The second way is to start from a higher place like a box or a ledge, but those aren't everywhere. The last way to fix this problem is to use a downwards facing second satchel. The satchel will get behind you sooner, so you have a better chance of popping it behind you before you hit the ground. There's one final thing to take into account when considering if you should look forwards or downwards when throwing a second satchel, and that is the satchel animation. If you wanted to detonate a satchel at point X, then you would throw the satchel at point A if you were doing a forwards facing satchel. If you were doing a downwards facing satchel, however, you would throw the satchel at point B, because the satchel won't make it as far before sticking to the ground, and you don't need as much time for it to get behind you. However, throwing the satchel at point A means that the satchel throwing animation will start sooner, which also means that it will end sooner. This means that your weapon will pull out faster when doing a forwards facing double satchel. Whether it's your ult, a shotgun, or whatever, you'll be able to fire it sooner. This is another reason why you mainly see movement specialists using forward facing satchels, especially in ranked. So now let's talk about why Ray4C had a harder time adjusting to the generator jump. The technique that I've always used for the generator jump was to air strafe completely around the arch, and then use my second satchel whilst facing downwards to propel myself to the top of gen. Ray4C, however, excels in the use of forward facing satchels for super quick directional changes. Back before the nerf to Raze's movement in patch 8.11, it was possible to hit the gen jump as a satchel strafe jump, using a forwards facing second satchel. This was only possible if you were a complete lunatic, which Ray4C is. Because he developed a muscle memory doing the gen jump as a satchel strafe jump, and he's naturally more inclined to use forwards facing satchels because of his playstyle, the adjustment to a satchel strafe satchel jump with a downwards facing satchel would likely have been very unintuitive for him. One of the first people who I saw successfully do the generator jump was GreyFPS, whose satchel style is closer to a mix between forwards and downwards facing satchels. Coincidence? I don't really know. It's hard to say for sure, but that's my conjecture. So overall, what's the best approach to forward versus downward facing satchels? I don't know, it depends, I guess. Look at the size of this fucking section. Let's end it quickly so we can talk about... I'm tired of all these badly drawn children's diagrams. Let's talk about something more simple. When should you crouch? The short answer, whenever you're airborne. The long answer? Well, there's a few advantages to crouching and very few disadvantages. First, let's talk advantages. Crouching reduces Raze's vertical hitbox size, and there are a few reasons why this is good. First of all, you're less likely to hit your head when flying under something. No one's perfect, and you're going to bonk your head every now and again, so it's better to have more room to work with. Secondly, you're less likely to hit your feet on something you're flying over, whether that be a ledge or just the grass that covers the ground of ascent. If you're still watching this video, then just like me, you very likely have a natural aversion to grass, so this is a good thing, I think. Thirdly, you have less total hitbox for your enemies to shoot you out of the sky, which is obviously a good thing. I'm not sure that this game has air resistance based on the surface area that your character covers, but if it did, then reason number 4 is that crouching gives less air resistance, which means more zoop. Zoop good. I actually think that even beyond Raze, the theoretical perfect player on any agent would be crouching whenever they are in the air for these reasons. So now let's talk about the disadvantages. Firstly, if you mistime your crouch release or accidentally clip the ground whilst crouching, you'll lose speed much faster than if you were standing. This is just because walking and running speed are both faster than crouching speed. Secondly, my crouch key is bound to left control and my pinky is in screaming agony. Has this ever happened to you?
Fuck just happened? What just happened?
What happened?
It's kind of hard to test, but as far as I'm aware, for a satchel to have an effect on Raze's movement, the satchel needs to be exposed to Raze's center of mass. If you've ever been somewhere like Bind Hookah Window and tried to satchel out, you might have found that your first satchel had no effect on your movement. So let's think about how we can solve this problem. If we draw a kind of vision cone around the satchel, you can see that after jumping out of the ledge, you're no longer inside the vision cone because it's blocked by the ledge. But there's actually a pretty simple fix for this problem. You see, if we move the satchel back a bit, our vision cone expands to cover a bit further out from the ledge. And we already know from the earlier section that you didn't skip because you wouldn't do me like that the satchel being further away means we get more power from it anyway, so as the kids would say, it is rather lit. This also applies horizontally, so keep that in mind.
One enemy remaining.
Damn!
Satchel out. Satchel out. One enemy remaining.
Quick satcheling is a term I made up because no one else seems to have a name for it. It's when you jump off an elevated platform and throw your satchel underneath you mid-jump. It's essentially doing a downwards facing satchel for the first satchel. If you've tried it before, you may have noticed that when double satcheling, this technique only works from elevated platforms. This is because of the last problem we mentioned earlier with downwards facing satchels. The satchel animation finishes later, so if you're starting from ground level, you can't throw another satchel before you hit the ground. This problem disappears though if you just stand on an elevated platform. The main benefit of this technique is that it saves time from placing the satchel on the ground and running up, and the only real drawback is that you can't throw the second satchel as soon, and that the rushed placement and jump can make hard jumps less consistent than a prepared setup. This is a less complicated concept as far as this video goes, so I guess we'll move on to... Almost every Raze main knows that jumping onto a satchel from above gives them more speed, but no one really seems to question why. Does knowing why help you to become a better satcheler? Maybe, maybe not, but I felt like it fit the theme of this video, so I'm going to say it anyway for all my curious little kittens out there. You see, long before time had a name, I was in a custom game on Ascent. I was practicing this here triple boost from Super Heaven to A main, when I realised that putting the satchel directly on the floor seemed to actually mute the amount of force I could get from the satchel. I'd always thought of the vertical force that you get from a satchel kind of like a trampoline, where the higher you start, the more force you get, but this has proven me wrong. I took my thoughts to the range, which has some very tall structures, and found that going even higher only resulted in less and less propulsion from the satchel. Why? I asked myself as I repeatedly died of fall damage. There are 3 reasons why being higher up makes you go further. The first reason is because you can literally jump further. You can throw the first satchel further forwards because you move forwards whilst falling. This effectively means starting your jump from further forwards. The second is that starting above the edge of the blast radius allows you to more easily reach it at higher angles. You could get the same speed from the ground by going for the edge at a more horizontal angle, but you would hit the ground too soon, so starting from higher gives you lasting speed with just one satchel. The third reason stems from the first 2 reasons. When you're double satcheling, jumping for your first satchel from a height means that you'll end up higher than you would have, so you're starting your second satchel from a higher height. When you use your second satchel, you can go for more speed whilst remaining in the air for the same amount of time, or go for the same amount of speed but stay in the air longer because of your initial height. Either way, you'll make it further with a satchel that started from higher up. Basically, if you start higher, you fall for longer and go further. So why does it start being less effective as you get higher? We'll think about the boost given by a satchel in terms of velocity instead of force for this section. We can split Raze's velocity when she's falling into a vertical and a horizontal component. The horizontal component of Raze's velocity depends on her starting speed from the run-up, assuming that the player doesn't airstrafe. We'll assume she was running at maximum speed before jumping, meaning that as long as the player holds W, she'll remain at maximum running speed until the satchel pops. Her vertical velocity, on the other hand, increases downwards the longer she's falling. The velocity that the satchel gives to Raze is constant, provided that the angle is the same and that Raze is on the outer edge when it pops. It has an upwards vertical component and a horizontal component in the direction that Raze is already moving. When the satchel pops, the velocity from the satchel will be added to Raze's current velocity. The horizontal component of velocity from the satchel adds onto Raze's run-up velocity, making Raze faster horizontally. The vertical component from the satchel, however, is in the opposite direction to Raze's vertical velocity. This means that if the vertical velocity given by the satchel is greater than Raze's downwards vertical velocity, then Raze will go up. If Raze's downwards velocity is greater than the satchel's upwards velocity, then Raze will go down. If they're equal, then Raze will stay at the same height. The longer Raze has been falling, the greater her downwards velocity. If it's too much, she'll go down after the satchel pops, offsetting the benefit of jumping further because hitting the ground kills all your momentum immediately. Now, I don't think this whole velocity substitution business is exactly ethical in a real scientific environment, but you get the point. Jumping from higher up means that you fall for longer before the first satchel pops, which means that eventually the satchel won't have enough uppies juice to counteract your downwards momentum. Let's have a quick talk about keybinds. The default keybind for satchel is Q, and Jing, arguably the best Raze player in the world, uses Q as his satchel keybind. However, Jing isn't really a flashy movement player. He does the occasional double satchel here and there, but if you really want to do some of the harder jumps, especially after the nerf, Q just isn't going to cut it. If you have the satchel bound to a button like Q, E, Z, or F, you won't be able to effectively airstrafe, because you'll have to take your finger off a WASD key. A lot of players will tell you to bind satchel to a mouse button, but I think the Ray4C has a pretty good argument against this.
Why avoid mouse button? Because of the mouse grip. You don't want to disturb your mouse grip, you know? If you use mouse button, after your satchel, you cannot shoot.
Oh yeah, they don't stand a chance.
Yeah, mouse grip is shit.
In case you didn't catch that, Ray4C is basically saying that binding satchel to a mouse button means that the tension in your wrist will change when you satchel, which becomes a problem if you want to shoot at the same time that you're detonating a satchel, because it will throw off your aim. You might have noticed I personally use spacebar as my satchel keybind. That's because I use scroll wheel to jump anyway, and my hands aren't flexible enough for me to be able to press X with my thumb, which is what Ray4C does. At the end of the day, the decision is yours, so do what works for you. Thanks for watching to the end, unless you skipped to the end, you filthy rat bitch. I also want to thank the people in the comments of my other videos who told me to make a guide. To be honest, I've been thinking about making a guide for over a year now, but a year ago I was a silver player with no viewers. I was pretty worried that I would put hours and hours into this guide just for no one to watch it, but now I knew that a few people would at least check it out. Although, when you said make a satchel guide, I'm not really sure if this is what you meant. I feel like most Raze movement guides are just play-by-plays for each individual jump, tips and tricks, or advice on how you should be using satchels in ranked. But I wanted to stay clear of that because I think there are guides for all the common jumps already, and I'm not good enough at the game to offer ranked advice. So this is more like general advice for how to maximize satchel movement in whatever context you want. I'd be interested to know if this video actually helped you hit a jump you couldn't do before. If you enjoyed this video, maybe there's a button on your screen, one that might allow you to express such an emotion. Or maybe not, I don't know. Anyway, that's all the productive advice that I have to offer this world, so get ready for me to continue shitting out bad montages of my Raze movement or something. Thanks for watching, bye.